Do you sometimes need to hear stories that build your confidence, that help you feel like, yes, we are mammals who can feed our babies from our own bodies without difficulty? I know I definitely do. When you are surrounded by stories of struggle and difficulty, it becomes hard to believe that we are mammals who can feed our babies human milk from our own bodies and do it with confidence and happiness. So I'm so happy to share this story today of Mel, a clinical herbalist who really had what I described, and she agreed, as a blissful breastfeeding experience. Let your heart be filled with joy as you hear this story that wasn't totally absent of any struggle at all, but really was the kind of experience I would hope for everyone. Listen out for what she attributed her blissful experience to, because I'm not surprised, and I think you won't be either. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. Having known only a handful of people who had ever done it and only seeing it up close a couple of times, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a childbirth educator, and an internationally board-certified lactation consultant, or an IBCLC. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore the systemic, medical, and cultural barriers that make feeding our babies so difficult, so that you know your baby feeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are.
Hi, I'm Mel. I'm a clinical herbalist. I live in the foothills of Mount Hood. I have one beautiful daughter who's very excited about turning double digits this July. She's a lot of fun. We homeschool her, and we love to play outside and do whatever we can to get outside hiking and enjoying our surroundings and the plants and whatnot. And yeah, I've lived up here for about 15 years now and lived all over the country and started in Germany, and I'm excited to sit here and chat with you.
Yay! So great. I've recently been introduced to a few herbalists, one right here in my town. Actually, two, one right here in my town and one not too far away. And it has been so neat to hear about the work that they do and how our work can complement each other. So
Very
I'm
much so.
really interested to hear a little more about that as we hear about your story. But before we get into that, I would love to take you way back to before you had your daughter, and even as far back as you can remember. And I would love for you to tell me about what your exposure to baby feeding and breastfeeding was, even as a child. Who did you see breastfeeding? Did you see anybody breastfeeding? Did anybody talk about it? Was it a part of your cultural upbringing or not?
What an interesting question and a fun one to reflect on. And I can honestly say that it was absolutely not a part of my cultural upbringing. I can't even tell you if my mom breastfed me, which is crazy. You would think I would have had that talk with
Wow.
her, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I did have the talk with her and forgot about it. I can imagine she would have tried, mainly because my parents didn't have the money to buy any formula. So let's go ahead and take advantage of what nature gave us. I am very much the most kind of natural minded person in my family out of all of my siblings. Not to say that they aren't, but they're definitely not as much as I am. So I'm just trying to think back. I think there might have been a few people who breastfed around me in the days, but I never thought anything of it. It was not a thing at all. Like, just did not even click because I didn't even think I would become a mother. My daughter was a surprise baby. um,
Wow.
and once that happened, I was pretty adamant about going as much of a natural route as I possibly could. And what a gift and a blessing, obviously. I'm very happy that happened in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you think about what you thought of baby feeding what you thought baby feeding entailed as a child? Did you have bottles? Did you pretend?
Now I'm thinking a little bit more. My cousins were younger than me, and I got to be like a big part of their early childhood. And it was all bottle feeding back then. I got to feed them, I got to change their diapers. That's what it was. It was the 80s, and that was the big thing then.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So you say that your daughter was a surprise. So
Ah,
I'm assuming you didn't do tons of prep leading up to the pregnancy when it comes to childbirth or baby feeding. But once you found out that you were pregnant, did you try to educate yourself at all about breastfeeding or baby feeding?
I definitely dove deep because at that point in my life, I was already studying clinical herbalism and I had been already invested in Aviva Rom's herbal medicine for women's health program. So I had quite a few legs up in that department. And I was a very avid researcher about all of the things natural birthing and natural families. And yeah, there was no stopping that except mother nature and my child being stuck in a position to where we did end up getting an emergency cesarean despite me saying that's never
Mm.
going to happen.
I know, the best laid plans, right? Yeah, so then go ahead. Tell me about what happened in the birth, and it doesn't you don't have to tell the whole birth story, but knowing that the birth can then impact what happens in that initial feeding. So thinking about the first feeding and then what you think happened preceding that, how you think that could have impacted your first feeding experiences. I would love to hear about that.
I think there were a lot of different things that impacted that moment. We labored at home for 26 incredibly beautiful, peaceful, amazing hours before my
Mm.
midwives were like, it's time to go to the hospital. And I lived in a very rural, I still do live in a very rural area. So it was like a good hour drive to the hospital after 26 hours of this baby's coming, this baby's coming. And I just remember my daughter was stuck in a position like this. So she was not coming out. And
So you have your neck up and your chin really up. So making it to where the head is elongated and back, which means there's just so much more head space trying to get through the vaginal canal.
and
Okay.
that space was not happening.
Mhm.
Thank you for
Right.
creating the visual on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's so funny because she still sleeps like that to this day, which is
So interesting.
pretty fascinating. And then we get to the hospital, and my midwife is absolutely amazing. She teaches at the Naturopathic College in Portland, Oregon, very near me. And she knew how important this natural process was to me. So she did take me to somebody that had the lowest cesarean rate in all of our state, a man who should have been retired long ago. And we got to him and he's like, this is happening. I'm like, okay, great. And I just remember the anesthesiologist, like, hey, we're going to give you this and that. And at that point in my time, I'm like, I don't care what you're
Mhm.
doing. Like, just make this happen. And I think it was quite a blur from there, but I do recall afterwards the nurses continuously asking me if I wanted any pain pills or anything like that. And I was very stubborn and I have a very high pain tolerance. So I declined all of the other medications after that cesarean, which I think most people would be like, wow, you're absolutely insane. But I did it because I was worried about my daughter and not wanting her to be on painkillers as a baby at that point in time. And that might not be the right choice for other people, but it was for me at that time. And then we weren't expecting our hospital visit, and we had some other trauma happen within 2 days of my daughter's birth where our dog got ran over. And we left
Oh.
the hospital. We didn't plan to go to the emergency vet and pick up our dog. It's fault. And it was my partner's dog. So it was a lot of emotional trauma at that time. And I remember prior to leaving that hospital, being there, learning to breastfeed, learning to latch. We used that little syringe taped to the finger. That was really helpful to just get that the mouth movement of her. But once we got through that, after the first day or two, we really didn't have much for problems in breastfeeding. It was what we did, and it was beautiful.
So do
Yeah.
you remember the first latch and what that was like?
Not really. I wish I
Mhm.
did. I wish I had some
Mhm.
like magical moment, but I think it was just like this. I don't know if I built up this huge amount of expectation for it. I just
Mhm.
knew that this is what we were going to do. I knew it was the best way for me to feed my baby, and we were going to make it work no matter what kind of problems we would run into. So we
And
did.
yeah, and so when you were in the hospital and you were using you said a syringe or was it a tube taped?
It was a tube taped to
Okay.
my finger that had a
Okay.
syringe connected to it.
Okay. Okay, great. With your breast milk in it.
Yes.
Okay. And were you hand expressing or were you pumping breast
We were
milk?
hand expressing at that point in time. I do remember getting the first bits of colostrum out, and wow, that's so exciting. There it is.
Mm.
How fun. Yeah. It was so fun. It seems so long ago, though. Like, it
Yeah,
was
I
jogging the
know.
memory really well. Almost a decade.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
wild.
that's great. You were able to hand express colostrum. Was there somebody that was teaching you that, or did you just try on your own?
I just tried on my own. I think somebody may have come in, but I was already doing okay. And they're like, oh, we're here to support you. And I'm like, that's great. I got it. And I
Mhm.
may just be that kind of stubborn person that's
Yeah.
very adamant to figure things out.
No, that's great. That's great. I, as a lactation consultant, whether I'm coming into somebody's house or I'm at the hospital, my goal is to build someone's self-efficacy. So if that self-efficacy is already there, that's fantastic. Oh,
Your
that's
job
what
becomes easy.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. If I walk in and somebody says, "I'm good," then that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, they were really nice in the hospital. Very kind beings for sure. I love the whole
Yeah.
L&D teams, all of them. Amazing
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. So you were using the I'm calling it the SNS tube, but it wasn't quite taped to your breast. It was on your finger. And
Mhm.
was that because she wasn't quite latching on yet?
That is what I believe, but I don't remember having a long struggle in getting the latch to happen. I don't remember that part, but I do remember using the tube and the finger. And that only lasted for a very few short days.
Okay. And while you were in the hospital, and then by the time you went home, she was
Mhm.
already latching. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I see this in the hospital where there's a rush to get babies feeding, and there will be extra tools being used to get milk in the belly more quickly.
Would you say
Um,
that rush is on the part of the care staff there or on the part of the mothers?
I think it's a combo, but I think it comes from the care staff typically,
Mhm.
that there's this idea that because what starts to happen is you see that weight loss and the weight loss is getting tracked, but often that weight loss is happening because there was an induction or there were IV fluids during the labor and delivery or there was a 45-hour labor and baby is really tired too by the time they get delivered, and so that first day and a half, 2 days maybe, they are very sleepy and not as interested in feeding. And so then there's this pressure to get baby nursing. And when baby is uninterested in nursing, then they start to suggest other ways of getting milk in the belly. Yeah. And of course, we want to make sure our babies are being fed
Right.
and we don't want to have these huge losses. But I think, if you backed it up to other systemic problems in the birth world, then we might not have this. particular feeding issue, but you have to deal with each feeding issue at hand. And I'm not saying that's what happened in your case. I wasn't
No,
there.
I'm just listening to the whole situation, like what
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
being in the hospital and working with so many mothers. It makes me curious too.
Yeah, yeah. But it sounds like you were able to help her suck, and then by the time you went home, she was latching and
Mhm.
she received breast milk exclusively, and you're not looking back on that time feeling like it was traumatic or stressful or that anybody was making you feel anxiety about the situation.
Yeah, I didn't that particular part of the situation was not stressful or filled with anxiety at all. And that's really interesting. Like now I'm a part of some lactation groups just to be there to support other moms and things along those lines, and I see the immense amount of stress these moms are going through or putting themselves through, and it makes me feel a lot of compassion and
Mhm.
sadness for them,
Yeah.
and this immense amount of pressure or the guilt when it doesn't work out for them that I'm just hearing from them, and it hurts my heart.
If you are feeling the immense amount of stress and pressure from trying to feed your baby and you've gone to the Facebook groups and you might have even had a lactation visit at the hospital and it really wasn't that helpful, I want to tell you that a private practice lactation visit with me might feel very different than visits that you've had previously. I would love to provide you the kind of compassionate support that so many of my clients have received. So reach out if you're feeling stressed out. There's no reason to keep feeling unsupported. I would love to help you feel less stressed and more secure about how to feed your baby. Yeah, it's so hard because there really are so many systemic problems that get in the way of baby feeding.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
And it's
I
no
remember
individual's fault.
I remember being pretty adamant about, yes, I will breastfeed in public, and no, I'm not using a cover because this is how I feed my baby. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure if it was just because suddenly I was in the world of being a mother and having a baby that I felt like this was just something that wasn't done very much at that point in time. If it was just this massive awakening of more people being open and accepting to breastfeeding, because there certainly weren't huge lactation groups on social media that were filled with women that were like, I'm not able to do it. Oh my gosh, I feel like a failure. Or I have so much milk. It's insane. What do I do with it? And all of the other variables that are out there. And that was only, again, 10 years ago. Yeah, I guess you may know this better being in the world as a lactation consultant. Is that something that's really coming out to the world in abundance in the last 10 years, or was it prior to that?
Yeah, so my oldest will be turning 10 this year too.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on Facebook and I joined like a local Facebook support group. And I do think there were some bigger Facebook groups, but I knew enough. I had educated myself enough and to know about breastfeeding that even though I was not a lactation professional 10 years ago, I could tell in those big groups that the answers that were given were not evidence-based enough to be helpful. And so I pretty quickly decided not to stay in. And
Mm-hmm.
now I'm back in them. And I do find that there is this sense of anxiety. My thesis about this is that we have not grown up in a society where we see breastfeeding around us from our very earliest moments. It is not a part of the air we breathe culturally, and it's in a lot of the anthropological studies. When it's the only option, when you're surrounded by it from your earliest memories, and when there is a lot of support.
Mm.
So in societies where there are allo mothers, in some social groups, an infant will have anywhere between 5 and 12 primary caregivers, not one. And
How
so
dreamy is
I
that?
know the mother can actually take a nap. She can
Mhm.
rest. She can feed herself. She can shower because there are so many other people available. And guess what? Some of those primary caregivers are also nursing that baby.
Mhm.
And so you don't feel like you're the only one who's providing for the baby at all
Mm.
times. And so I
Sounds
think,
amazing.
yeah, so I just think we societally have a structure that sets us up for failure. And because of that, we feel like failures.
Mhm.
And because we're feeling like failures, yet we know we're mammals and we're supposed to be able to do this, our anxiety increases. And then the people we go to for lactation support, like our pediatricians, are not educated on breastfeeding. And then
Mhm.
the anxiety increases because we get bad advice.
I see it constantly. Like we could go nuts inside of those
Hmm.
groups. And it's very sad to me to see how much poor information is given. It's kind of
Hmm.
what made me do what I do in this world too. And it's so important to have a bit of science and a bit of anecdotal evidence on our
Right.
side.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. You need
uh,
both.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely, for sure. And I feel for those moms, me in particular, is like speaking as an herbalist and helping moms discover what's safe and for their children, just the amount of poor information. Do this, do that, with nothing to back it up. You're already stressed and tired and exhausted as a mother, especially a new mother, because you don't have that 6, 5, however many person support team helping you raise that infant in this society. And now you have a thread of 100 plus answers to navigate through
Hmm.
from Joe and Schmo and Jill to know what they're saying. And now you're going down the Dr. Google rabbit hole, ending up even more confused.
I know. It's so hard. Yet
It's
it's the
sad.
only, at least when you ask in a Facebook group, you can, you have that separation. Because if you ask a friend and they're judging you, well, then that judgment always follows you. So I understand why so many people choose that route because you can close the app,
Oh,
turn
yeah.
off the computer. It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
As if we
So
don't have enough struggles as mamas.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really hard because we're working within a system that just doesn't support people to take
Hmm.
care of their children.
Sick care system, not the healthcare system.
Yeah.
Sadly.
And culturally as well, the healthcare system and the cultural structure.
Mm.
If we're lucky, we get 12 weeks of paid maternity leave. At 12 weeks, that's when our milk supply has just regulated. And then you have to start pumping away from your baby. And it's a whole new ball game.
It's so hard. It's so sad.
I know.
I'm gonna cry. No.
I know, right? Yeah, yeah. Going back to your story, you went
Yeah.
home, and then how did things go once you were at home? You're navigating this emotional trauma of losing your dog unexpectedly. Did your dog
The dog survived. The
okay.
greater emotional trauma was the conflict now between my mother's poor decision making and the near death of my partner's dog, who she's laying right beside me right now. And
Oh, wow.
she's 14 and a half. And
Okay.
actually, this weekend we have been discussing, is it that time? Is sad. The fact that we got an extra 10 years with her is pretty amazing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was really challenging dealing with that emotional trauma because the reason it happened is because my mom, bless her heart, she's amazing. I love her. She's brilliant. She's been through her share of trauma in life. She was basically reliving her teen years because I was her last kid of three at the age of 22. And I had this beautiful birth all ready to happen naturally and beautiful on my 10-acre property in my lovely little home at that point in time. And when we went to the hospital, she called me and was like, "Can I invite my boyfriend over to be there?" Like a dude she'd been dating for 3 weeks. her track record with boyfriend choices is not awesome. And I'm like, no,
She
you
wanted him to
can't.
be at the birth?
She wanted him to come when I was coming home. So like she wanted
Okay.
him to come up and hang out and wait for me to get out of the hospital so I'd come home with my
No.
one and
You
only child and be like,
no. He
"Hey,
cannot be
dude,
there.
dating my mom." Exactly. And so she got pissed that I would not let her have her boyfriend come up there and decides to leave. And we lived like a mile up this dirt road on the side of like it connected to Highway 26, which is like a big, busy highway through our little rural area. And she has two dogs as well. And my dogs were usually outside roaming about. And she decided to leave. And so this one dog, oh, you're leaving with my dog friends, follows her down the road, gets run over. Yay. Fortunately, my brother and his wife, my sister in law, were there with their daughter and waiting for us to come home. And they got the call and went and took our dog to the emergency vet. So that was all traumatic. My partner was livid. I was livid. Everything was just a mess. And I remember Anira, she was 4 days old. It's my daughter. And she was crying for 4 hours straight. And we were like, did we break our daughter? What's happening? Like, why is this baby crying?
Mhm.
And I decided to give her some of my tea that I made called Peaceful Baby. I made it for colic and teething and all of the things. And I gave her it through that same syringe and tube part. And I gave her 5 mils of it. 5 milliliters. That's not a lot. And she fell asleep for 10 hours. And then I was really like, did we break her? What did we do? Did we break our child? Oh no. But it really helped calm her down. And I'm pretty confident that her crying was due to our emotional stress of that time and back and forth. What do we do with this dog? What's going on with all the trauma with my mom? And just all of those things. She was feeling that stress and therefore in
Yeah.
great abundance. Yeah. Oh, so fun. So yeah, after that, everything with breastfeeding was pretty easy. I was still in recovery and healing. I did have quite a few people in my community come over to hold Anira and love on her. I can look back now and feel like how incredibly supported I was at that point in my life. I did work out of my home with my own business, and so I was able to be there. I didn't have to go back to work for somebody and pump in a locker room or in a bathroom or something so incredibly unintimate as what many moms are faced with today. So I am so grateful for that. I was able to be there for her all the time for her first 3 years of life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And in many parts of the world, you would still get that paid time off, even if you owned your own business.
Mm.
Some people think, oh, I'll work. I work from home. I'll just work from home and I'll have the baby there. And it's hard to work and have a baby with you simultaneously.
It sure
Um,
is.
it is not easy. So,
Yeah.
how did you manage that?
Fortunately, I didn't have to work much from home and I loved what I was doing. So I was formulating and creating herbal products for moms and babies and for other people that wanted a more natural lifestyle. So it was my passion as well. And it just evolved into a little product line business, which I no longer run actually about a year ago. I let go of, which is great for me as well. So I was lucky in that when I did go to farmers markets, she got to come with me and experience that and meet the farmers and taste the fresh food and learn about those kinds of things. And as she grew up in the markets with me and started pouring teas for people at those events or would go into stores and see my product. So she just got to grow up around it. And it was just life. I didn't feel like it was hard. It was what I chose to do.
Mm.
The business, all in all, if I look back on it, I'm like, oh, heck yes, that was hard. But
Mhm.
I was also, again, back to that stubborn and determined person I might have mentioned that I am.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you have any bumps in the road as far as breastfeeding? Did you encounter any thrush or any mastitis or anything that along the way? And how did you deal with anything like that?
I was really lucky and I didn't, but I was also really well prepared. I
Okay.
had read a lot and like how to avoid thrush and how to avoid mastitis. And if it does happen, what do you do? And I was so lucky that it didn't happen.
Great. And
Yeah.
what were the things that you were doing to avoid?
I was just breastfeeding regularly. I didn't have to be interrupted by it. If she wanted to feed, we could. If I was super engorged, I could do something about it. I wasn't put into a position where I couldn't. Trying to think specifically what else I did to avoid it. I think maybe I was just more prepared to handle it with herbs. And gosh, it's been so long. It's not at all on the top of my mind right now. The cabbage and the mastitis, I remember that one very clearly.
Mhm.
But I never had to use it.
Yeah.
I made it a great point to eat very nourishing foods and to support my nervous system and to drink very nourishing herbal teas that also supported my nervous system. I spent a lot of time outdoors. I was surrounded by nature. I was really lucky. I
Yeah,
was really
that's great.
lucky.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And did you have a family doctor or a pediatrician that was supportive of your baby feeding choices?
My midwife is now my naturopath, and she's also incredibly amazing. She was so fun, and I had been going through clinical herbal school right before I had met her. So they were incredibly supportive and wonderful. And I would watch all of her interns come through because she also taught at the Naturopathic College in Portland, Oregon, and watch them on their learning journeys. And she would always set me up for their like our interviews, our appointments. That's the
Mhm.
word. Would always be like she'd be so excited to have her interns there because she knew I was a wide open book for the interns to learn from and with. And yeah, she's unbelievably supportive to the point that I remember when my daughter was about 2, she got sick, which didn't happen often. And I remember calling my naturopath going, "Oh no, my baby's sick. What do I do?" And my naturopath was like, "Mel, why are you calling me? Like, you know what to do. Why are you calling me? You know exactly what to do." And I think at that moment, I was like, oh my God, she's right. I am a clinical herbalist. I own my own herbal apothecary. I help other people with all of these herbs. And here I am worried about what to do for my daughter, my 2-year-old's like cold. It was a very basic cold too. And they were just like, you don't need us. And that was a pretty awesome moment in time. I remember being on the phone, like, what do you mean? And then when it clicked afterwards, I was like, oh, everything I've been dedicating my life to is all right here. So cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And then did you ever have any pushback from family or people in public? I know you're in Portland, Oregon, so
Yeah.
it's a little more open, but especially
Right.
as your baby as she got older, how long did you end up breastfeeding?
We breastfed until like about a month before her 3rd birthday, and it was just
Mhm.
like clearly time to stop. I did not feel any pushback because, yes, I am in Oregon. I'm about an hour east of Portland.
Yeah, right, at the f yeah, at Mount Hood, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's way prettier than
Mhm,
Portland.
mhm.
I do live in a pretty liberally minded, open minded area. I am also a person that carries myself in a way that says, oh, you want to talk shit to me? Excuse my language. Don't. Because
Mm.
it's not worth your
Mhm.
time. Whether somebody would have thought something about it or not, I would have just quickly brushed away and been like, get over it. Because I am. This is my baby. These are my
Mhm.
breasts. I am feeding her. She is well nourished. If you do not like it, do not look at me. Ta
Mhm.
da!
Yeah.
I don't need your comments.
And sometimes with strangers, that's a lot easier. And with family members, there can be a little more conflict because they actually know your personality and they don't care. They're going to talk to you anyway. But you didn't have anybody in your family who ever was like, when are you going to stop? Or, Anything like that?
No, I don't
Okay.
think we did. I think they all knew that they also know me well enough that I'm going to do whatever the heck I want to do.
Okay.
So they know
Great.
it's not worth their energy to argue with me either, too much at least. Maybe there might have been a slight bit of resistance from my mother in law, who's
Mm,
very much not of that kind of mindset, but also she's that person that I can come in and educate quickly and be like, this is why I'm doing it. And if you want to have a problem with it, great. That ain't going to stop me. I'm going to
right.
nourish this
Yeah.
baby as best as can be.
Yeah.
Try and
Great.
argue with me about
Yeah.
it.
And what, yeah, give it a try.
Yeah,
Um,
go for it.
what was your weaning experience like?
Super easy. I think like I was sad about it because I'm like, but my baby, but this is our
Mm-hmm.
bond. This is what we do together. But it was just very clearly that time. I was like, oh, I'm noticing like she's not as interested. I think I was getting to that point where I'm like, okay, would you get off of me? Because
Mm-hmm.
that would be great. um,
Yeah. I totally know this feeling.
yeah. And so we just did it. I didn't feel much resistance from her. Sure, there were a few months afterwards where she's always reaching in my shirt or saying she wanted them, but I'd just say, no, we're done with that right now. Everything's
Mm-hmm.
okay. I think we tapered off slowly, if I remember, but it was a pretty easy experience as well. I'm feeling
Mm-hmm.
so lucky with all of your questions. I'm like, man, I really had it easy.
What is great is the Milk Making Minutes is all about sharing the struggles and the triumphs.
Mhm.
And sometimes there's a lot of struggles. So it's really nice to have these stories where somebody says, you know what? No, it really was really easy from the beginning because that brings some hope.
Yeah, it really was. And it was really beautiful. And I can really look back and think about how much support I did have, which was far more than most women in our country, you know.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. How did that support impact you? And what were the ways that the support really allowed you to be able to breastfeed?
I think in just knowing that friends were there, like they were just friends of me and my partner who wanted to be a part of this child's world because they loved and cared about us. And they would come in and hold the baby. If I wanted a shower, they would just play with her, though she's always been very resistant to any new adults, always, still is, which is very interesting to see. I just live in a very special community of amazing people that are there to support you for who you are and what you want to do in the world. And I think there might have been some people that may have had a lot of respect for my choices in that department and like, heck yeah, go you, do this. This is amazing. Yeah. When I look back on it and think about it in that way, just knowing that I live in a vortex of fantastic human beings. And
Mm,
it's changed a lot over the last 10 years. We're definitely being much more inundated with a massive tourist community, which it's always been for tourism, but a lot of the local people aren't able to stay here anymore. But in a nutshell, that community was just strong and there for me. And I was so
that's
lucky.
great.
Again,
Yeah.
I didn't have to go anywhere. I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't stuck on a computer working for somebody else while trying to nurse my daughter. I was playing with herbs with her on in my Moby wrap or in my Ergo. And how cool is that? Letting her smell the herbs and feel the herbs and touch the herbs and yeah.
Is she into herbs now?
She's awesome. Yes, she is.
Mhm.
She actually, I was having a chat with my team yesterday, and we were talking about one of my next lessons I'm teaching about teaching your kids herbal first aid. And here comes my daughter down the stairs. Hey, mom, do you have any plantain for that splinter I got at the coast? Because we just got back from a camping trip, and like it was in the middle of a Zoom call, and they're like, "Can you cut that clip right now?" So she knows more about herbs than most adults in our country,
That's
which is
amazing.
it's
Yeah.
great. It makes me
Yeah.
happy for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she knows which ones she has a powerful relationship with, and she's developed those, particularly with chamomile, as like one of her absolute most necessary herbs for her because she does deal with a little bit of anxiety, which immediately turns into a tummy ache for her. And since she was a toddler, she would come up to my teas and pick out the chamomile flowers and just eat them. And
Mm.
now, if she has like any kind of anxiety or a tummy ache or anything, I can go as far as saying, "Would you like me to make you some tea?" And she will instantly calm down without me making the
Wow.
tea. Like
Mm.
she's
Just
got that,
knowing
like,
that it's there. Right.
that's her comfort. And I think it's so beautiful to see.
Yeah, that really is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really cool. So she definitely has. She's a nature girl, super connected in that way in all the ways, which is great. And it makes me feel that it's funny that I never thought I would have a child because I started going to school in the late 1900s and the early 2000s for environmental and experiential education and making sure kids got outside and in touch with
Mhm.
nature is really fun for me. I always loved to do that. And to think that I wouldn't want a kid. Like, come on. Who the heck was I? What was I thinking? I think it was more that my mom had three at the age of 22, and I was like, I don't ever want to do that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Before we get into talking about how people can connect with you and find your work, I would love to know when you think back on your almost 3 years of breastfeeding, and now it's been 7 years since you were
Right.
breastfeeding. When you think back on that time, if you were able to travel back in time in a time machine and think about that time or be able to experience that time again, what would you go back and re-experience?
That connection, looking at those eyes, watching that cute little baby mouth suckle, listening to her breathe and seeing those cute little chubby fingers wrap around my giant breasts because they are giant with or without milk, and
Mhm.
just watching her love that. And when the eyes would roll back into the head and you could see that they're
Mm.
just in this state of ecstasy and bliss and love, I would go back to that in a heartbeat.
Mm.
I will say, to my downfall in my breastfeeding time, it is when I got addicted to my cell phone.
Mm.
I was not addicted to my cell phone prior to that, and it would have been lovely had I chosen books instead of my phone to scroll. If I could go back and change anything I would have done during that time, that's what I would change. I would not do the phone scroll. I would focus more on that connection with her
Mm.
and I would read a
Mhm.
book instead if I were really bored. But yeah, I can definitely pinpoint that time. Like, obviously, our phones are designed to make us addicted. And boy, howdy, do they. That's when it really happened for me. So,
Mhm.
interesting
Yeah,
to think
it's
about
really
that.
hard. That so much time breastfeeding in the middle of the night, and sometimes you feel so alone, and everybody says, "Enjoy every moment," yet sometimes you're just trying to make it through the next moment, and people are trying to make it through the next moment, and sometimes we check out to our own detriment, and so
Mhm.
finding that balance of doing the things that are actually gonna be for our best long-term health. Did you watch any particular shows while you were breastfeeding? Do you think of a certain show that you watched?
No, I'm a terrible show watcher. I definitely spent way too much on time on social media. I
Mhm,
probably spent a bunch of time researching something herbally related because that's what I do still.
mhm.
Like, I can't stop researching. Yeah. So I probably back in those days was probably spending too much time looking into how to deal with the FDA and a product line and GMPs and all kinds of weird things. Unfun things, but very necessary things. Yeah.
Okay. So, speaking of that, my listeners are either people who are currently feeding babies or people who support people feeding babies, other IBCLCs, lactation professionals, doulas. So, knowing that those are the people who listen, what do you do that these people can benefit from?
I do a lot that you can benefit from. As I stated in the beginning, I'm a clinical herbalist. I host a podcast as well called The Herbalist Path. And I focus on teaching moms how to use plants as medicine in a safe and effective way. So I have a membership that is called Apothecary Mama, and we talk about all the different ailments from pregnancy all the way to emptying the nest, whether we're talking about cankles or varicose veins or sleepless nights in pregnancy, or we're talking about what herbs are safe during breastfeeding and can I give that to my baby, or colic or acne in the teenage years, or all the things, colds and flu. I talk a lot about how the body works and what's going on in the body during those times, different lifestyle choices you could consider that may remedy whatever issue you're facing, and then we talk about what herbs you can turn to as well. So that's a lot of fun. I do biweekly Q&As in there. I invite in guest teachers that are naturopaths and other clinical herbalists and really wise people to teach on whatever particular subject they need to teach on that particular month. So that's a super awesome program filled with lots of recipes. And then I also do a medicine making mamas program, because oftentimes people will love the formulas that I share with them inside of Apothecary Mama, but they get to this point where they're ready to create more, or maybe they want to start making their own formulas, but they want to feel really confident that they are extracting the medicinal properties of the plant in the right way, or using the right solvent, or learning how to make it tasty so their kids will actually take the herbs. That's one of my specialties. Yeah, so I do those kinds of things and I love it. It's a lot of fun. Yeah,
Great. Yeah. So I'll have all of that info linked in the show notes so people can just click and go right to it.
awesome.
And are you on social media too?
Oh, yeah. You can find
Okay.
me on Instagram at The Herbalist Path, TikTok at The Herbalist Path. I'll be getting my YouTube more operational again. I've taken a YouTube break to restructure some processes in the back end, but I'll be getting back on YouTube and teaching more great herbal medicine tips and tricks for mamas.
Great. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming to share your, I don't want to say blissful because you never said that word, but
Oh, but I do feel it.
okay. Your blissful breastfeeding story,
Oh,
because it's so nice to hear a story where even though your birth story did not go as you hoped, you were still able to have a breastfeeding journey that was everything you wanted it to be. So I really am so thankful for a story like that, and it will bring so much hope to my listeners.
oh, good. That makes me so happy because I was like, oh, I'm going to go on and say everything was perfect, but it wasn't all perfect. It was beautiful and it was blissful and it was challenging. And I'm so grateful I had the opportunity. Thanks for having me here, Lo.
Did you catch what Mel said made the difference for her? It was brief, but she said it was the community support she had around her, the people who helped her and protected her while she fed her baby in the way that she felt was best. And the scientific and anecdotal evidence tells us that that really is what makes the difference for people in the postpartum period. If you are looking for a community of people who want more blissful breastfeeding experiences for more people, especially if your experience was not blissful and you would like to eliminate more of the barriers that make breastfeeding and chest feeding and pumping so difficult for so many people, join my Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. It's not going to happen overnight, but we are going to keep the conversation going, ask each other questions about the barriers, and talk together as both parents and professionals to improve the landscape for those coming behind us so that barriers get removed. And the only way to remove the barriers is to bring light to them, shine light where the darkness is. Go ahead over there so that you can be a part of the discussion. See you there. Bye. Hi, Jolie.
Hi.
What do you think is the best part about breastfeeding?
I don't really know.
What do you think babies think is the best part?
Their mama.
Being with their mama?
Yeah.
Being close to their mama?
Yeah. And get it? B.
B?
As in the Amazon.
Bzzz. Do you think they like snuggling their mama
Yeah.
or their parent?
Yeah.
Do you think they like the milk?
Yeah.
Do you remember the taste of mama milk?
Because of cow's milk, I do.
Oh.
If it wasn't for cow's milk, I would have forgot.
Oh, do you think it tastes the same?
But cow's milk is much colder.
Cow's milk is colder. So you remember mommy milk being warm
Yeah.
and cow's milk being cold.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.